There is a strange tragedy in modern man. He cannot endure a moment of silence without searching for comfort to rescue him from it. The slightest discomfort sends him reaching for noise, for distraction, for applause, for anything that will keep him from meeting himself in the quiet. Yet strength has never been born in crowded rooms or easy pleasures. The soul is not hardened by comfort but by resistance, not by being entertained but by being tested. Most people imagine mental toughness as something loud and visible, a warrior shouting into battle, a champion standing before cheering crowds. But the deepest strength is often built where nobody claps. It is formed in the private wars no one sees, rising when the body begs for rest, remaining disciplined when excuses feel reasonable, enduring loneliness without surrendering to bitterness. Comfort whispers like a friend while slowly weakening the will. It promises peace, but leaves a man fragile. And the more the world worships ease, the more rare it becomes to find someone capable of standing firm in suffering without collapsing into self-pity. People often speak of comfort as though it were the natural reward of life, the proper condition in which a man is meant to remain. From childhood onward, he is taught to avoid difficulty wherever possible. He seeks the softer road, the easier task, the lighter burden. He rearranges his entire existence around convenience, and then wonders why his spirit has become weak in the midst of abundance. What he does not understand is that comfort, though pleasant for a moment, quietly removes the very pressures that produce strength. The body itself reveals this truth plainly. A limb left unused begins to decay. Muscles weaken not because they are attacked, but because they are spared resistance. The soul follows much the same law. A man who never denies himself anything eventually loses the ability to deny himself anything at all. His desires cease to be servants and become masters. What began as harmless indulgence slowly becomes dependency. He no longer chooses comfort, comfort chooses for him. There is something deeply deceptive about ease because it rarely appears dangerous at first. Great destruction seldom enters a man's life announcing itself openly. It arrives gently, almost politely. A little more sleep, a little less effort, a little delay, a little compromise. None of these things appear fatal in isolation. Yet together they shape a character incapable of endurance. Weakness is often not the result of catastrophe, but of unchecked comfort repeated for years. The modern world praises convenience with almost religious devotion. Every invention promises to remove struggle from life. Food arrives without effort, entertainment without patience, pleasure without sacrifice. A man may spend entire days escaping discomfort without realizing that he is training himself to fear difficulty, and fear of difficulty is the beginning of slavery. The one who cannot endure hardship becomes dependent upon circumstances remaining pleasant. The moment pain arrives, and it always does, he collapses inwardly because he has built no resistance against it. Strength is not formed during moments of ease. It is formed in resistance. Patience is born when irritation must be endured. Discipline is born when desire must be denied. Courage is born when fear must be faced instead of avoided. Remove struggle entirely, and these virtues have nowhere to grow. A comfortable life may produce a contented body while leaving the soul undeveloped, like a sword left unsharpened because the process is unpleasant. Many people imagine suffering itself automatically creates wisdom or strength, but suffering only presents the opportunity for growth. One man becomes bitter through hardship, while another becomes disciplined. The difference lies in whether he resists the temptation to escape every difficulty immediately. There is a kind of maturity that only emerges when a person remains standing under pressure instead of fleeing from it. The temptation of comfort is that it offers immediate relief while stealing long-term resilience. It is often in silence and private struggle that the strongest parts of a person are formed. No audience witnesses the battle against laziness in the early morning. No applause follows the decision to remain faithful to discipline when excuses seem entirely justified. Yet these hidden moments shape the soul far more than public victories. Character is not built by reputation, but by repeated choices made when comfort invites surrender. One of the strangest contradictions of human nature is that people admire strength while avoiding the very conditions that create it. They respect courage but flee fear. They praise discipline but resent inconvenience. They desire resilience while arranging their lives to avoid resistance. Yet there has never been a strong mind formed entirely through ease. The oak tree does not grow mighty in sheltered rooms, but in open fields where storms force its roots deeper into the earth. There are few things modern man fears more than silence. He surrounds himself with noise not merely for entertainment, but for escape. The constant voices, distractions, music, conversations, and endless movement often conceal a deeper anxiety, the fear of being left alone with his own thoughts. Silence removes the performance. It strips away distraction and forces a person to encounter what truly exists within him. And this is precisely why so many avoid it. A man may appear confident among crowds, disciplined before others, even virtuous in public view, yet silence exposes whether these things are genuine or merely rehearsed. When applause disappears and no eye remains to observe him, his real character begins to reveal itself. The soul cannot hide forever in noise. Eventually, in stillness, it must speak honestly. There is a difference between image and character that many fail to understand. Image is what a person carefully presents to the world. Character is what remains when presentation becomes unnecessary. Silence destroys the illusion because it offers no audience to impress. In quiet moments, a man discovers what he truly loves, what he secretly fears, and what controls him when no external pressure demands restraint. It is easy to appear disciplined when circumstances are favorable. It is easy to appear kind when kindness costs nothing. But silence has a way of uncovering hidden disorder. A restless mind often reveals a restless soul. Many people cannot sit alone without immediately reaching for distraction, because stillness forces them to confront emptiness they have spent years avoiding. The endless hunger for stimulation is not always pleasure-seeking, often it is self-avoidance. The ancient mistake of humanity is believing that external noise can silence internal weakness, yet noise only delays the encounter. A man may spend years entertaining himself while neglecting the condition of his spirit. He may remain endlessly occupied and still remain inwardly fragile. Silence interrupts this illusion. It reveals whether there is substance beneath activity or merely exhaustion disguised as purpose. There is also something refining about silence that discomforts the undisciplined mind. In quietness, excuses lose much of their power. A person begins to recognize how often he blames circumstances for habits that are actually rooted in weakness of will. Silence removes many of the places where responsibility hides. One begins to see how much of life has been driven by impulse instead of conviction. The strongest individuals throughout history were rarely those addicted to constant distraction. They cultivated inward stability. They could remain alone without becoming consumed by anxiety, because they had learned to govern their own thoughts rather than flee from them. A noisy mind is often an uncontrolled one. The inability to endure silence frequently reveals dependence upon external stimulation to maintain emotional balance. There is a peculiar honesty in solitude. A man discovers whether he possesses peace or merely diversion. Many people confuse the absence of visible suffering with genuine inner strength, but silence exposes the distinction quickly. When left alone, some collapse inwardly because they have built their identity entirely upon external approval, entertainment, or constant activity. Remove these things, and they no longer know themselves. Silence also reveals desire with uncomfortable clarity. Hidden ambitions, resentments, jealousies, fears, and insecurities become difficult to ignore once distraction disappears. The person who never enters silence may spend an entire life unaware of the forces secretly shaping his behavior. Yet the one willing to endure quiet reflection begins to understand himself honestly, and honesty is the beginning of transformation. Most people seek comfort in noise because silence demands courage. It requires a willingness to stand before oneself without excuses, without performance, without escape. Few things humble a person more than realizing how undisciplined the mind becomes when no distraction remains to occupy it. Yet this same silence becomes the place where real strength begins to form, because only what is honestly confronted can ever be mastered. There is a peculiar weakness in the human heart that longs to be seen while it struggles. Many people can endure difficulty so long as someone is watching, admiring, or praising the effort. The presence of an audience gives energy to discipline because approval becomes its reward. Yet the truest form of discipline begins precisely where recognition ends. It is built in those hidden moments where no applause exists to sustain the will. A man's public actions are often less revealing than his private ones. Before others, he may appear diligent, controlled, and committed, but solitude uncovers whether these qualities are genuine convictions or merely performances maintained for reputation. What a person repeatedly does when no eye observes him shapes his character far more deeply than occasional displays before the world. There is something in human nature that constantly seeks escape from responsibility when consequences seem distant or invisible. The student studies harder when examinations approach. The worker exerts greater effort when supervisors are present. The athlete pushes further when crowds cheer. Yet discipline that depends entirely upon observation is fragile because it is rooted in external pressure rather than inward principle. Remove the audience, and the structure collapses. True discipline emerges when a person obeys what is right even though neglect would go unnoticed. It is rising early though no one would condemn extra sleep. It is maintaining integrity where dishonesty could remain hidden. It is continuing the difficult task long after excitement fades and recognition disappears. These quiet acts rarely attract admiration, yet they shape the soul with extraordinary force. The world often misunderstands greatness because it notices only visible achievement while ignoring the unseen habits that produced it. Every admirable life is built upon countless private decisions nobody celebrated at the time. Long before excellence becomes public, discipline has already been practiced silently and repeatedly in ordinary moments. What people call talent is often endurance concealed beneath years of unnoticed effort. There is also a dangerous temptation to substitute appearance for substance. Modern culture encourages people not merely to accomplish things, but to display themselves accomplishing them. Even struggle itself becomes performance. A man announces his ambitions before he has cultivated the strength to fulfill them. He seeks admiration for intentions rather than transformation through action. Yet speaking of discipline is infinitely easier than practicing it in silence. Private discipline possesses a purity that public effort often lacks because it cannot feed upon applause. When nobody notices sacrifice, the motive becomes clearer. A person discovers whether he values growth itself or merely the praise attached to it. This is why hidden discipline strengthens character so deeply. It forces the will to stand without external reward. Many people wait to feel inspired before acting, not realizing that discipline often begins precisely when inspiration has vanished. The mind naturally seeks comfort, delay, and excuse. It argues persuasively for surrender, especially in moments where failure carries no immediate consequence. But every private victory over laziness strengthens the will a little further. Character is formed less by dramatic decisions than by repeated resistance against small acts of self-indulgence. There is a profound difference between motivation and discipline. Motivation is emotional and unstable. It rises and falls according to circumstance. Discipline is quieter and more durable. It continues even when emotion disappears. The disciplined individual learns to act according to conviction rather than temporary feeling. He understands that waiting for perfect desire often leads to permanent stagnation. Much of life's true battle occurs in secrecy. No one witnesses the internal struggle against fear, resentment, distraction, or despair. Yet these hidden conflicts determine the quality of a person far more than public success. The one who learns to govern himself privately develops a kind of strength the world cannot easily shake, because his stability does not depend upon constant validation. The tragedy for many is not lack of ability, but lack of unseen consistency. They desire extraordinary results while neglecting ordinary discipline. They search for dramatic transformation while avoiding daily resistance against comfort. Yet greatness rarely arrives through sudden change. It is carved slowly through repeated acts of obedience carried out long before results become visible. Suffering is one of the few things in life that strips away illusion with terrifying honesty. Comfort allows a man to imagine himself stronger, wiser, and more stable than he truly is, but hardship reveals the condition of the soul with unsettling clarity. It exposes weaknesses long hidden beneath ease. It uncovers fears carefully concealed beneath confidence. And because suffering reveals rather than flatters, most people spend their lives attempting to avoid it at any cost. Yet suffering itself is not the enemy many suppose it to be. The greater danger is often the kind of person one becomes in its presence. Pain has a strange power. It can deepen a human being or distort him entirely. The same hardship that disciplines one man may destroy another. One becomes wiser through affliction while another becomes bitter. One learns endurance while another collapses into resentment. Suffering does not automatically improve character. It merely exposes and intensifies what already exists within it. There is a false belief common in modern thinking that all pain is meaningless and must be eliminated immediately. People speak as though discomfort itself were an injustice, but much of human maturity emerges precisely through enduring what cannot be escaped. Courage cannot exist where nothing threatens. Patience cannot exist where nothing frustrates. Endurance cannot exist where nothing must be endured. The soul develops strength only when resistance forces it to grow beyond its natural laziness and fear. A comfortable life often leaves a person emotionally fragile because he has never learned how to suffer properly. The slightest disappointment feels catastrophic because his spirit has been trained only for ease. He mistakes inconvenience for oppression and difficulty for unfairness. But hardship is not evidence that life has abandoned a man. Often it is the place where life is shaping him most severely. There is something deeply revealing about how a person behaves under pressure. Some individuals become cruel the moment suffering touches them, as though pain grants permission for selfishness. Others descend into self-pity and begin worshipping their wounds until suffering becomes their entire identity. But there are also those rare individuals who become steadier through hardship. Affliction humbles them without destroying them. They learn compassion without weakness, resilience without arrogance. The soul resembles metal placed within fire. Heat does not create the material, it reveals its quality. Weakness hidden during peaceful seasons becomes visible during trial. This is why suffering often feels so frightening. It removes distraction and exposes whether a person has built his life upon substance or illusion. Many discover too late that they cultivated comfort more carefully than character. There is also a hidden temptation within suffering itself, the temptation to escape growth through bitterness. Bitterness allows a person to remain wounded without changing. It transforms pain into accusation. Instead of asking what hardship might teach him, he asks only whom he can blame for it. Yet bitterness weakens the soul far more than suffering ever could. It chains a person emotionally to the very pain he wishes to escape. Endurance, however, produces something entirely different. The individual who continues forward despite fear, disappointment, loneliness, or exhaustion develops a depth impossible to acquire through comfort alone. He learns that emotions are unreliable masters. He discovers that despair can be resisted rather than obeyed. Gradually, hardship teaches him stability because he no longer expects life to remain easy in order to remain faithful to his purpose. It is often through suffering that a person encounters the limits of his own control. Pride begins to weaken because pain reminds him of his dependence, his mortality, and his vulnerability. The illusion of self-sufficiency fades. This humbling can either soften a person into wisdom or harden him into resentment. The direction depends largely upon whether he accepts suffering as a teacher or merely curses it as an enemy. Most people desire the strength that hardship produces while secretly wishing to avoid the hardship itself. Yet resilience cannot be borrowed from theory. It is forged slowly through repeated encounters with difficulty. Every burden endured without surrender deepens the roots of the soul, making it less vulnerable to fear, impulse, and despair. There is within every human being a quiet conflict between desire and wisdom. The mind may recognize what is right, necessary, and noble, yet the appetite often pulls toward what is easy, pleasurable, and immediate. Much of human weakness begins not because people fail to understand truth, but because they fail to resist themselves. The tragedy is rarely ignorance alone, it is surrender to impulse. Pleasure in itself is not evil. There are good things in life meant to be enjoyed with gratitude and balance. Yet pleasure becomes dangerous the moment it ceases to remain a servant and begins acting as a master. A man who cannot deny his own desires gradually loses authority over his own life. His choices no longer arise from conviction but from craving. What feels good becomes more important than what is good. The modern world encourages this surrender constantly. Every appetite is treated as sacred. Every desire demands immediate satisfaction. Patience is considered unnecessary, restraint oppressive, discipline unnatural. People are taught to follow feelings wherever they lead, while ignoring the fact that feelings are often unstable guides. The result is a society overflowing with stimulation yet increasingly incapable of self-control. There is something deeply weakening about a life governed entirely by pleasure. The mind becomes restless and impatient. Ordinary effort feels unbearable because constant indulgence has reduced tolerance for discomfort. The individual loses the ability to endure boredom, frustration, delay, or sacrifice. He becomes emotionally dependent upon stimulation to feel alive, and dependence of any kind slowly erodes freedom. One of the greatest deceptions of pleasure is that it rarely announces its cost immediately. Excess always disguises itself as harmless in the beginning. A little distraction, a little indulgence, a little escape. Yet repeated surrender strengthens appetite while weakening resistance. Habits quietly form chains long before a person realizes he is bound by them. What once felt optional slowly becomes necessary. The human mind must therefore learn resistance, not because pleasure itself is forbidden, but because unchecked appetite eventually consumes the will. The individual who obeys every impulse becomes internally divided. His intentions may remain noble while his habits pull him elsewhere. He promises himself discipline tomorrow while repeatedly surrendering today. In time, he no longer trusts his own decisions because his desires constantly overpower his convictions. There is a profound difference between freedom and indulgence. Many assume freedom means the ability to satisfy every desire without restraint, but a person enslaved by appetite is not truly free at all. Freedom belongs to the one capable of saying no to himself. The disciplined mind possesses authority over impulse rather than submission to it. Without self-control, desire becomes a tyrant ruling the soul from within. The strongest individuals are rarely those who experience the least temptation. More often, they are those who have trained themselves not to obey temptation automatically. Resistance strengthens through practice, just as weakness strengthens through indulgence. Every small act of restraint deepens the will slightly further. Every unnecessary surrender makes future resistance more difficult. There is also a peculiar emptiness hidden within endless pleasure-seeking. Temporary satisfaction promises fulfillment but rarely delivers lasting peace. The appetite always demands more because indulgence enlarges desire instead of satisfying it permanently. A person may spend years pursuing comfort, entertainment, and stimulation only to discover that constant pleasure has made him inwardly shallow rather than whole. The disciplined mind learns something important that the impulsive mind never fully understands. Not every desire deserves obedience. Some impulses must be challenged, redirected, or denied entirely. Maturity requires distinguishing between what is merely wanted and what is truly valuable. Without this ability, life becomes governed by emotional reaction rather than purposeful direction. Much of mental toughness consists not in dramatic acts of heroism, but in ordinary resistance against small pleasures that quietly weaken character over time. It is the refusal to become controlled by appetite, distraction, laziness, vanity, or comfort. The person who learns to govern these internal forces develops stability, because his life no longer depends entirely upon changing moods or immediate gratification. The mind that cannot resist pleasure eventually struggles to resist anything at all. Difficulty feels intolerable because desire has been trained to expect constant satisfaction. But the mind strengthened through restraint becomes capable of endurance. It learns patience in delay, clarity in temptation, and steadiness in discomfort. The world has always admired visible strength. It celebrates the loud victory, the public triumph, the dramatic display of courage before crowds. Yet the deepest forms of strength are often far less noticeable. They do not announce themselves with noise or demand recognition from others. True endurance is quiet. It remains standing long after excitement fades, long after applause disappears, long after easier people have surrendered to exhaustion or despair. Many mistake intensity for strength because intensity appears powerful in the moment. A person may feel sudden bursts of motivation, confidence, or determination, yet emotion alone rarely survives hardship for long. Human feelings change quickly. Enthusiasm rises and falls like weather. The one who depends entirely upon emotional energy often collapses the moment suffering becomes prolonged or results arrive too slowly. Endurance requires something steadier than temporary inspiration. There is a hidden glory in remaining faithful through difficulty when there is no immediate reward for doing so. Anyone can persist briefly while success feels near or recognition remains visible. But endurance reveals itself when the road becomes repetitive, lonely, and uncertain. It is continuing the task after failure. It is maintaining discipline after disappointment. It is resisting despair when progress becomes invisible. The human spirit naturally seeks escape from prolonged discomfort. Pain exhausts the mind. Delay frustrates desire. Repetition weakens enthusiasm. This is why many people begin noble pursuits but fail to continue them. Starting requires excitement, enduring requires character. The distance between ambition and achievement is often crossed not through talent alone, but through the stubborn ability to continue when continuation feels unpleasant. There is also a dangerous illusion in modern culture that strength means never struggling emotionally. People imagine the strong individual as someone untouched by fear, loneliness, uncertainty, or fatigue. Yet genuine endurance often exists alongside these very things. Courage is not the absence of fear but the refusal to obey it. Strength is not emotional numbness, but perseverance despite emotional difficulty. A person becomes mentally fragile when he expects life to remain comfortable before he can remain committed. The moment hardship appears, his stability collapses because it was built upon favorable conditions rather than inner conviction. But endurance teaches the soul to continue independently of circumstance. The enduring individual learns that discomfort does not automatically justify surrender. There is something profoundly shaping about prolonged struggle. Short trials test emotion, long trials test identity. A person discovers what truly governs him when suffering extends beyond what feels manageable. Some become resentful because hardship violated their expectation of ease. Others become disciplined because hardship forced them to develop patience, humility, and resilience they otherwise would never have pursued. Endurance also confronts pride in painful ways. It reveals human limitation. It forces a person to accept weakness, uncertainty, and dependence rather than maintaining illusions of constant control. Many wish for strength, while secretly wishing to avoid the humiliation of difficulty. Yet endurance is formed precisely through repeated encounters with limitation. The soul grows stronger by continuing through weakness rather than pretending weakness does not exist. The strongest people are often not those who move the fastest, but those who refuse to stop. There is remarkable power in consistency. Small acts repeated faithfully over time shape character more deeply than occasional dramatic efforts. The disciplined person understands that greatness is rarely sudden. It emerges slowly through persistence long before results become visible to others. There is also a loneliness attached to endurance that many find difficult to bear. Crowds gather around beginnings and victories, but few remain present during long seasons of quiet struggle. This solitude tempts people toward discouragement because human beings naturally desire reassurance and recognition. Yet some of the most important battles in life must be fought without constant encouragement from others. The enduring soul gradually develops stability that temporary success cannot provide. Circumstances lose some of their power because endurance teaches the individual that discomfort can be survived. Fear weakens when repeatedly faced. Patience deepens when repeatedly required. The person who learns to endure hardship without surrender becomes far less controlled by impulse, emotion, or external approval.